Hello, Miss Wallner. It's Matea and my dad, and we are going to be talking about the Club Native video clip, and we will get started. So, what was your opinion on the Indian Act? Do you think it was racist, or do you think it was not racist? Do you think it was a legitimate document?
I don't know a lot about it, but I think that it was hopefully their best attempt at fairness and equality in making decisions as to who would be included in the benefits that would be extended to them. So having said that, the best people to know that would be the individuals that wrote it and the people that it
Affected?
Yeah.
Did you know that it was essentially an act to assimilate all of the Indian and Native peoples into Canadian, so-called Canadian culture?
If that's the case, and I'm not familiar enough with it, then I don't know if one can argue that it's either a good thing or it's a bad thing. And if people don't want to be assimilated, it has to be understood that there still has to be a certain degree of assimilation just in order to get along. If the degree of assimilation is to not be able to recognize a people group any longer, then the question has to be asked if that's really an appropriate thing.
So what would you say about, so you think that language and appearance, do you think those two things should be ways that a certain people group should be assimilated, whereas a people's land, such as a First Nations people's land, do you think that that's a legitimate way that the government should not have tried to assimilate by taking over burial grounds and such things as that? Do you think that those lands should have been left to the people while their appearance and their native tongue should have been assimilated into English and the Canadian culture?
I think if you're going to live in Canada, you need to do some things to get along with where you live. So if that means you need to learn English or French in order to get by in the country, then you should do that. As far as losing your language or your identity, or if it was the way you dressed or the way you conducted your lifestyle, as long as that doesn't encroach on any laws of the country, then you should be encouraged, permitted and encouraged to keep it as part of your heritage and culture.
Okay.
As far as lands being taken or absorbed by the government, if that's the case, I don't agree with that. Any land claims that are legitimate should be taken at all. If it's been agreed on, then and if there's a claim that comes against it, then there should be a negotiated settlement, not a grab.
So, coming into talking about lands being absorbed for over 260, 270 years, Oka County, there's a big crisis there. What are your feelings on that? Do you think it was legitimate, or do you think it was not needed, the whole entire crisis?
I don't know enough about what their goals were or whatever. If the land belongs to, in this case, the Mohawks, then and it's not disputed, then there's no dispute. If there is a dispute, you go to the courts and settle it. And hopefully the decision, because our legal system is not perfect, hopefully the decision made is the right one, and the ruling is enforced properly.
So how the Mohawks and First Nations people worked is just as in oral stories, which were just stories obviously told orally, not usually written down until modern day. They did the exact same things with lands and such. So when the church gave the land's 200, probably 300 plus years now, to the Mohawks, that whole legal giving of the land without writing it down on paper, do you think that makes it that land, that Oka land, legitimate, even though there was no legal paper saying it was so?
Well, if they were given something by a government at any time, then there will be a legal document somewhere. And in conjunction with that, it'll be common knowledge, even if something is done just through a verbal agreement, common knowledge should be such that it's commonly known that this is the case. And then that should bear the weight of a legal document, in my opinion.
Okay. What were your thoughts on the requirements of becoming a status or a legal status Indian? Do you think it was fair for a very long time they had to, or they didn't have to, but the requirements were your blood count, how much native you had in you in order to be considered a status Indian? Compared to now, you have to have 4 legal registered grandparents that were Indian. What is your opinion on that? Do you think it's kind of the same thing, or do you think it's a little easier now?
Well, the first case was administered by the government, and then they obviously said we don't need to do this anymore, likely because of being lobbied by the Native community, which then went to the bands. So now the bands make the decisions based on who is or isn't going to receive status. Are they doing it the right way? When you watch the video and you see the fact that people that live there don't get to enjoy the having status, even though they were born on a reserve and lived there all their lives. They've been part of the culture and so on. Even though they have all that going for them, they're not given status. I don't agree with that either, necessarily. There needs to be probably some tweaking, just like there was tweaking from the Indian Act, determining who was going to have status to the bands. Perhaps now some further examination needs to be given in regards to how the bands are given status to individuals.
Okay. There was a lot of emphasis put on marriage, and there was a couple women in the Club Native clip that fell in love with non-Native men. Do you think that these women should protect their pure bloodlines versus marrying for love, or do you think love just trumps all?
I think you need to marry the person that you should be marrying, and the fact that marrying one person over another would produce an offspring with a different blood count, if you will, is a lesser consideration than marrying someone that you love. And the problem, the pressure is that if you don't marry someone that's in the bloodline, then the bloodline is going to disappear, and there wouldn't be any true blood Mohawks, which would be sad. Unfortunately, because of the size of the people group that we're talking about, the possibility exists that could happen in the future, which is unfortunate. In which case, the only way to keep your culture alive is to focus on the culture and on heritage and on tradition, and those people that practice those things. The responsibility really rests with them to carry on on the people.
So it's really the parents' job. Say if one woman marries a Mohawk man or a Mohawk man marries a woman, for their children to be brought up by those two parents in the Mohawk way, in their culture and traditions and heritage, in order to preserve, even though they aren't full Mohawk, to preserve their culture. That would be...
preserve the culture by preserving the culture, not necessarily preserving the bloodline.
Okay.
If you can't preserve the bloodline, it's just like if you're Canadian, we're not Canadians by blood, we're Canadians by association, and it's a citizenship. We live in Canada, so we are eligible for Canadian citizenship. If individuals live in a Mohawk reserve or territory, however you want to call it, then perhaps they need to be eligible for Mohawk citizenship, if that would be the case.
Concerning the bloodlines, do you think it's a natural progression for a certain people group or bloodline to slowly fade away or to completely die out, especially in today's day and age? Do you think that's actually a possibility, or it's just a natural progression? What's your opinion?
It can be a natural progression when the population is not large enough to support itself.
Okay.
We have people groups through time in history that don't exist anymore or can't be identified any longer. So it's happened to lots of different bloodlines, if you will, in the past, and it's going to continue to.
All right. Well, that wraps up our little discussion about the Club Native documentary. And please forgive our raspy voices and a couple coughs here and there. We're kind of dealing with a couple things here in the house. But thanks for listening, and we enjoyed watching and discussing the clip.